Okay, it looks like we are now. Okay, great. I'd like to call today's Senate Transportation meeting to order. As you notice, I don't look like Bill Landon. Senator Landon unfortunately is not with us today, so he's turned over the reins to me, and so we'll begin right away. Could we have a roll call, please?
Senator Anderson?
Here.
Senator Furphy?
Here.
Senator McEwen?
Excused?
Vice Chairman Pappas?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Senator Landon excused.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Chairman Landon.
Excuse.
Okay, so the first bill for our consideration tonight is House Bill 0007, Commercial Vehicle Driving Disqualification. So
Afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
please
and
take
committee.
it away.
I'm Representative O'Hearn. I bring you House Bill 007, which relates to the commercial motor vehicles, amending offenses that disqualifies a person and amends the rules and provides for an effective date. What is in Wyoming Statute 317305, but not specifically mentioned in this bill, is that in subsection A, a driver will lose their license for not less than 1 year if convicted of any of the 9 violations listed under subsection A. A DUI, for example, is the first of those 9 violations. Subsection B states that the penalty is increased to not less than 3 years if one is convicted of any of the 9 violations listed in subsection A, while transporting hazardous materials. So that's the difference. Subsection C states that a person may be disqualified for life if convicted of 2 or more violations of any of those specified. Which brings us to subsection D and E in the new language in this bill. On page 2, line 4, states that any subsequent convictions of another disqualifying offense under subsection A shall not be eligible for a reduction under this section. Subsection E, which has been separated into 2 subparagraphs from the existing statute, states that on line 12, the word may has been struck, and one shall be disqualified for life if one is convicted of either Romanet I or Romanet II. Romanet II has been added to our current statute to meet federal requirements. Transporting drugs or humans with felonious intent will get the driver a lifetime disqualification with no eligibility reduction. So that's one and done. In conclusion, and most importantly, this bill ensures our compliance with the Commercial Motor Vehicle Safety Act and the latest FMCSA requirement so that our truckers can continue with their interstate commerce. I, along with our state folks that manage our highways and CDL licensing, and the state's Trucking Association, all ask for your favorable consideration of this bill. And I'll stand for questions if there are any.
Thank you. Questions of Representative O'Hearn, committee? Questions? No questions. Okay, department, could we have some comment? Director, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, for the record, Luke Reiner, Director Wydot. I'm going to pass the mic to the leaders on the left, but let me just start by saying that I think this is an important piece of legislation. Certainly, we support it. You know, if you use your truck in the offense of human trafficking, you probably do need to lose your license for the life, and it helps clean up the details in this act and bring us in line with the federal guidance. But let me pass it to Mr. Rossetti and see what he's got.
Mr. Chairman, Taylor Rossetti, Support Services at WYDOT. The representative did a great job walking you guys through the bill. I will point out that we did have to make a slight amendment on page 2, line 6. We changed circular reference in order to make this read more clearly. I think with that, there is a federal compliance issue. And as the representative mentioned, those offenses in section A, those are the offenses that you can get a 1 year, and on your second offense, you get a lifetime. That is the lifetime ban that after 10 years, you can reapply. And then Sections E or D and E, as the representative mentioned, those are one and done. So those offenses are the ones that if you're convicted of them, you just have a lifetime ban, a true lifetime ban. The language there on page 2, lines 3 through 7, get us in strict conformance with the federal motor carrier requirements, and will align our rules and regs to follow this language so that we're strictly following that process. With that, I'd stand for any questions.
Thank you. Committee, questions? Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious, the section on line 2, 21 through 23, I assume that gets us in compliance with the federal regulations, but I'm just curious, have we stopped any vehicles that we've identified are actually trafficking humans in our state?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, it'd be a better question for patrol. I could certainly get back to you, but not to my knowledge.
Thank you.
Actually, just a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, there have been several cases where we've actually saved some individuals who called and we apprehended the offender. So the short answer is yes. I can't give you a number. We'll get back to you on an exact number, but yes, it occurs, and it's a national issue, and the numbers actually are shocking as you start looking at the numbers. The issue of human trafficking is alive and well in this nation, and it's unfortunate. I'll tell you my hat's off to the American Trucking Association, though. They take this very seriously, and I know Ms. Forster's here to talk, but they basically say we got, every driver on the road is eyes. And they know how to report it. And so from that standpoint, there's some good things happening in that space.
And you would have to have been found guilty of this felony before this would come under compliance. So it could, if you were a driver and didn't know you were transporting somebody, I suppose that would be something completely different. So. Thank you. Any other?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the question on those 4 or whatever we said we caught, those may not have been Wyoming CDLs though, right? Might have been transporting across the state.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, I would suspect that's indeed the case.
Probably. Committee, further questions? Thank you. Appreciate it. I'll open it up to public comment now, and I think the Trucking Association could weigh in. Ms. Furch, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Sheila Furch with the Wyoming Trucking Association. We are in support of this. As I testified before the House Transportation Committee, we don't like mandates. We don't like them telling us what we have to do or what the state has to do, but this is an important one for us to support. Director Reiner talked about the partnership that the American Trucking Associations has, not only with all of the state trucking associations, but the group called Truckers Against Trafficking. And we take it very, very seriously. This reinforces that. This is a heinous crime, and there isn't a company out there that would be supportive of finding out their driver had taken part in that. It's real easy to think about human trafficking as a trailer full of people, and that's not necessarily what happens. It can just be a person within that truck that's being transported across state lines. And I think that's what's happened most of all in the states that we're seeing right now. And the truck drivers they're the eyes, and a lot of the reports that have been filed over the United States in the last several years have come from truckers. And so they are making a huge effort in trying to combat this. So we're very supportive. Hope you will support the bill as well.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Committee?
Thank you.
Any other further comment, public comment from within the room? Director, please come back.
Mr. Chairman, again, for the record, Luke Reiner, Director WYDOT. I'm not sure we've talked, it is in your packet, but I did want to bring your attention to this letter from FMCSA because I think it's an important talking point as you potentially talk this on the floor. So as has been said, this law, statute change in Wyoming would bring us into compliance with the federal rules. The guidance from FMCSA is, listen, if you don't come in compliance, then there's a chance they could decertify our CDL program, which would have significant issues, and pull about 4%, I think it's about $17 million of some of our funding. So there's some real teeth in this letter, and the suspense is this fall.
Okay, thank you for bringing that to our attention. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, in hearing about this before, I thought it was trafficking and also drug distribution or delivery or something, but there's nothing in this about drug delivery or anything, so that it's just human trafficking, right?
Right.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, that's to the best of my knowledge. Let's see if Mr. Rossetti has something on the drug use there.
Chairman Pappas and Senator Anderson, are you speaking of nothing in the letter or nothing in the bill that has to do with drug trafficking?
Either.
Please.
Senator Pappas, Chairman, and Senator Anderson. The drug offenses is actually already in statute, so that doesn't have to be addressed here. And that it actually is contained on page 2, lines 15 through 19. So that's that specific language for the drug defenses. We already had that in statute, so we don't have a compliance issue there.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. Questions, further questions? Okay, is there any other further public comment out there? Anyone online? No one online. Okay, so close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Motion? It's been moved by Senator Anderson, seconded by Senator Furphy. Discussion, committee? Question, and the question's been called for. Could we have a roll call, please?
Senator Anderson,
Aye.
Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator McEwen,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Pappas,
Aye,
Chairman Landon.
excused. Okay,
Who's
committee,
going to carry this on the floor? Should Senator Landon carry it?
who would like to?
He said he would. Yeah.
Did he?
yeah.
Okay, all right, we'll do
He's a
that.
volunteer. Yeah.
Voluntold. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone. Okay.
Not to show up for the committee.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, our next bill for consideration is House Bill number 16, Military Assistance Trust Fund Authorized Uses. So if we could have the military department please come up and help us with this bill, that would be great.
Seems funny to see Reiner walking out when it's a military bill. You can let him stay. Yeah, yeah.
Mr. Smith, Major, hi.
Hi, sir.
Who's gonna,
I'll walk us through the bill.
okay, great, thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Major Jackie Maury. I'm the legislative liaison for the Wyoming Military Department. And I'm going to walk us through the bill, joined by Mr. Chris Smith, the senior legal advisor for the Wyoming Military Department. So this is a committee bill that we worked during the interim session. So my goal is to just provide a really quick overview, make sure we're all on the same page about what the bill does and the potential impacts for the military department. In 2004, the Wyoming Legislature established a reserve account titled the Wyoming Military Assistance Trust Fund. The fund is outlined in Wyoming Statute 19-7-401. The fund is available to Wyoming residents serving in the armed forces as well as members of the Wyoming National Guard. The specific purpose of the fund is to allow those individuals to apply for financial assistance for issues that stem directly from their military service. Any financial assistance that's provided is done so from the interest earned from the trust fund versus from the original corpus. The caveat for the fund has been that applicants have to have been in an active status. If passed, this bill will expand eligibility to members of the Wyoming National Guard who are in an inactive duty status, and that's the status that most guardsmen are in for their drill weekends. This bill is before you because under General Porter's leadership, the #1 priority for the military department has been achieving an in-strength. In the military department, we get at in-strength 2 ways. So first, we try to increase accessions, so recruit more people into uniform. And number 2, we try to retain our qualified and trained soldiers and airmen. So this bill is trying to help us with that second effort. We know through an internal survey that about 30% of our force weighs drill weekend childcare against their decision to stay in the Guard or to leave. So we believe that we have a way with this bill to assist with that one obstacle. Through the rulemaking process, the military department will target this benefit at a specific group of soldiers and airmen. So those who have lower years of service, at this point, we're thinking 10 years or less. Those with less rank, so E6 and below on the enlisted side, and our O2s, O1s on the officer side. And we'd also target it at our traditional force, so those members who are not full-time that come for drill weekend. This bill does not create new dependent care options. All it does is reimburse that target audience for expenses incurred on their own. So they have to find childcare, dependent care, and then submit a receipt for reimbursement. We have talked with DFS about a way to determine an appropriate cap, so it wouldn't be open-ended. There'd be some market value of what a day's worth of care should be, and we would cap the reimbursement at that. The bill itself is divided into 2 sections. So section 1 mostly starts with revisions and additions to the current statute. So for example, if you look at line 5 on page 2, we add the term military in front of reserve unit just to further clarify the eligibility requirements for this trust fund. And then we create a new subsection on page 2, lines 22 through 23, and it continues on to page 3, lines 1 through 4. This new subsection is identified as Roman numeral 5, and you can see on line 23 the phrase dependent care, and this is really the meat of House Bill 16. On page 3, line 10, we add the phrase or other required military duty, and that's how we capture inactive duty, that status that our traditional guardsmen are in for drill weekend. Section 2 simply provides for a July 1st effective date. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions from the committee.
Okay, thank you, Major. Committee, any questions? Senator McEwen.
We're really gonna let lieutenants participate in this too? It truly is a kinder, gentler military. Thank you.
Chairman Pappas, Senator
Thank you.
McEwen, that's the plan, but if we get a lot of pushback, then we'll reconsider that.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm on the fiscal note, and it's 136,000 per year. I have 2 questions on that I don't know how we figure that out so quickly that we know what that's going to be. I thought they applied for it or something. But the last sentence of that says will occur in tuition and fees at Wyoming institutions during the next 3 years. This assumes no increases. This hasn't anything to do with tuition and fees, does it? Isn't this about childcare?
Major.
Chairman, Senator Anderson, you are correct. That is a typo on our part. The dollar amount, the fiscal impact is an estimation that we did during the interim. So we looked at using those rules that I outlined, 10 years of service or less, those ranks, our airmen and soldiers that have registered dependents in DEERS, and we assumed a certain rate of participation. So we know that a decent amount of our service members have this figured out, whether it's a spouse that doesn't serve and is available to watch their children. So I think we applied like a 40% participation rate to come up with that number. And then we used a DFS market survey to determine what that daily rate would be.
So it was an estimated guess.
Yeah, yeah. Mr. Chairman, a follow-up. So that, you're just taking it from the earnings, I believe is what that said. Is there enough earnings to do that 136 per year, or is it quite a bit more than that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, another great question. It would just be from the earnings. We're not permitted to touch the original $5 million corpus. Based on what we have in the account now and a goal of General Porter to keep $1 million set aside for a large deployment based on previous large deployments and what we used from the trust fund, and using what's left, yes, we believe that we can sustain that amount. And then through the rulemaking process, further narrow as we see who's using it and where we're seeing a return on our investment.
Thank you.
Okay. Committee, any further questions? Okay, all right, thank you. Is there anyone out there else would like to? Okay, I'll open it for public comment now. Looking for other departments, but we really don't have another department, do we? Mr. Winnie, please.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I would just mention there is a small group of our military department folks that are on independent temporary duty, temporary additional duty, whatever the buzzword is, and they don't get forgotten, but they can incur some things, Christmas, holidays, things like that, expenses, and they're alone wherever they are. And that's the nature of the duty. They got it. I've been there, done that myself. But this kind of thing might be able to, subject to whatever the general and the other folks might put out, help ameliorate some of the things that go with being somewhere a long way from home and not being in a unit. You don't get a send-off. You don't get a welcome home. You just get an airline ticket and set of orders. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Questions, committee? Thank you, Bill. Any other further public comment? Anybody online? No one online. Okay, so we'll close public comment. Committee?
Move, Bill.
Okay, moved.
Second.
Seconded. Okay, moved by Senator Anderson, seconded by Senator McEwen. Committee, any, I think the bill was worked well enough.
You're gonna hate me again. I'm gonna call for the question.
Call for the question. All right.
Can we just eliminate that last line on the?
I don't know that,
Can we can't touch it.
well, we can probably ask LSO, but
Okay.
I don't know if fiscal
can
notes
touch
can be
that.
edited. I've not ever done that before, but
Me neither. I don't know if we can touch it.
Not to my knowledge, Mr. Chairman, no.
okay,
Okay,
thank
all
you.
right.
Okay, so I think we're ready for a roll call then.
Senator Anderson,
Aye.
Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator McEwen,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Pappas,
Aye,
Chairman Landon.
excused. Anybody want to volunteer for this one?
I'll volunteer.
Okay, Senator Anderson.
You want to do it? You do it. Okay.
Okay, well, that's great. Since we've been clipping along, I think we'll be able to get to our next bill. So let's do it.
Let's do it.
Okay, House Bill number 17, Veterans Facilities Surrounded by Grazing. So, Mr. Smith, can you please, General, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it.
Yeah. The floor is yours, the mics are yours.
Sounds good. I, appreciate the opportunity to testify in the front of the committee again. I think I will have Mr. Smith run through the bill. This obviously was an interim topic that we worked through and should be able to, I think, achieve understanding pretty quickly.
Mr. Chairman, Chris Smith, Senior Counsel for the Wyoming Military Department. In front of you is House Bill 17. As all of you may well remember, during the interim, we were looking at trying to protect some of our veteran facilities from encroachment of additional development. The original
interim topic concerned the cemetery. The Joint Transportation Committee decided to broaden that out to all veterans facilities, including the Veterans Home and Skilled Nursing Center in Buffalo. During the interim, the committee looked at two different bills, one purchased by the military department of the buffer zone areas near the cemetery. And the bill in front of you was the alternate version that came before you, which was essentially to limit the state land that's managed by OSLI to only surface grazing and no other uses. The bill in front of you, House Bill 17, really adds into an existing statute in 36.5.106, which limited the use of the Richard Bridge Historic Park and added in the Oregon Trail Veterans Cemetery as well as the Veterans Home and Skilled Nursing Center in Buffalo. On page 2, down in line 15, is the new language which was added to the existing statute, which was really the two pieces of property that OSLI manages, which is described by legal description. And on to page 3, it's the 266 acre parcel, which is kind of to the south and west of the cemetery, and then also a small 19.3 acre parcel, which is that piece that's on sort of the west side of the cemetery on the northern sector. And then in subparagraph C, beginning on line 17 of page 3 and on to page 4, is the Veterans Home and Skilled Nursing Center in Buffalo legal description. The real meat of the bill occurs on page 4 and essentially says, beginning on line 5, that the state lands described in this subsection should not be otherwise disposed of in any lease authorized therein shall contain a clause restricting the use of the leased property to grazing purposes only. And then on line 9, during the interim, they added the provision subject to the approval of the Adjutant General, so long as the Veterans Home and the Skilled Nursing Center existed, which is the out. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for the committee's question on House Bill 17.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Committee, any questions? It's been, I know we worked it over the interim, and frankly, you know, it looks long because of all the legal descriptions, but you know, certainly if you just look at lines 14 and 15 on page 3 and line 12 and 13 on page 12, it's the land around the Oregon Trail Veterans Cemetery and the land around their skilled nursing facility, basically. So we're just creating the buffer zone around those. So Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, this is necessary because we established a skilled nursing facility on that property in Buffalo in Johnson County. And then we found out that the land had been leased for a gravel operation. And then it was released again by the SLID board, I believe it was, for a gravel operation. I don't think this bill says that is dissolved. It'll still be a gravel operation, won't it?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, the bill in front of you would go into effect on July 1 of 2022. I know Director Scoggins and her deputy are here and can answer what OSLI will do if the bill is passed and goes into effect on July 1 and what happens with that existing gravel lease. I know we heard testimony previously from Mr. Crowder that the lease is not that long a term. He's testified, I didn't write down in my notes, but I'm sure he can answer the question on where we are in the current lease. Certainly this bill, if passed and goes into effect, would not allow the lease to be relet in the future. As to what happens to the current lease, I'm sure they will be glad to answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
I look forward to it.
Any further questions? Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curious, where are you at in terms of getting this lease completed? Is the land already leased by the state land commissioners? And so it's just following through, and have they agreed to restrict it to just grazing?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, from the military department's perspective, I can tell you that the land we're talking about around the Oregon Trail Veterans Cemetery is currently leased for grazing. The land around the veterans home, I think, is only subject to that gravel lease Senator Anderson just mentioned. But again, I'll defer, of course, to OSLI, who actually manages the land.
Okay, further questions, committee? Thank you, Mr. Smith. Okay, I think we probably have some other testimony out there. Before I open it to public comment, please come forward. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
members of the committee, thank you for allowing us to comment today on House Bill 17. For the record, I'm Jennifer Scoggin. I'm the Director of the Office of State Lands and Investments. With me today is Deputy Director Jason Crowder. Before we dive into answering some of the questions that have been posed, there's a couple of comments and concerns that we wanted to raise. And I'm sure that the committee's heard some of them. But I think it's important to remember, first of all, that the lands at issue in this bill are of two different characters. The lands that are adjacent to the Veteran Cemetery are common school trust lands. The lands that include the Veterans Home are institutional lands, so they're managed a little bit differently. With respect to the common school lands, I'd like to share OSLI's concerns, and then I'll turn it over to Deputy Crowder to talk about the institutional lands. So I'll start with just a little bit of background. Section 14 of the Organic Act for the Territory of Wyoming reserves Sections 16 and 36 to public schools. Section 4 of the Act of Admission of the state of Wyoming into the Union provides that Sections 16 and 36 in every township are granted to the state for the support of common schools. Article 18 of the Wyoming Constitution accepts those grants of lands made by the U.S. for trust purposes and creates the Board of Land Commissioners, which has the direction, control, leasing, and disposal of lands of the state granted for the support and benefit of public schools. And then there's an additional statute, which is Wyoming Statute 36-1-104, which provides that under the provisions of Article 18 of the Constitution of the state of Wyoming, the state accepted the lands granted to it by Congress and set the lands apart for the purposes described in the different acts. So with that backdrop, we have concerns with the bill as related to future management of the state trust lands located next to the Veterans Cemetery. And you'll notice that Section B of the bill, which I believe deals with that property, restricts the use of the property to grazing and limits disposition of the property subject to approval by the adjutant general. We have constitutional concerns that this bill will provide authority over management of state trust lands to a third party that was never really contemplated or anticipated by the Constitution. We also have constitutional concerns that the bill essentially cuts out the Board of Land Commissioners from management decisions for this state school trust parcel. We understand that this bill was largely based on the language in that Wyoming Statute 36-5-106 regarding the Richard Bridge Historic Park. But you'll note that when the legislature passed that bill, it included language that preserved the discretion of the Board of Land Commissioners. It provides that if after investigation and study, the board deems it in the best interest of the state of Wyoming to enter into a lease agreement with the town of Evansville, goes on from there. So it builds in and continues the Board of Land Commissioners' discretion to continue to make those management decisions for those state trust land parcels. This bill in Section B and Section C, which Deputy Crowder will get to, completely removes the Board of Land Commissioners from the discussion and inserts the Adjutant General's discretion instead. And again, that raises constitutional concerns. We also have concerns that the lands may no longer be managed for the benefit of common schools as required by the acts and the Constitution and the statute that I just provided for you. While we understand that the legislature can create the bounds by which the board must manage the trust lands, it is still a trust, and we believe must be managed accordingly with a fiduciary duty to the trust beneficiaries. So we are concerned that the lands adjacent to the cemetery, they're supposed to be held in trust for K through 12 education, not the benefit of the military department, not the benefit of the citizens of Evansville or anyone else. Now, please don't misunderstand what we're saying. We're certainly in support of the military department with maintaining the sanctity and the ambiance around the cemetery. And we're certainly willing to continue discussions as to how we can do this in other ways, exploring other options. We just have concerns with the consequences of this bill. And so with that, I would yield to Deputy Crowder to talk about the institutional lands, which are managed a little bit differently. And so these are the lands that are included in Section C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the committee is aware, the interim committee asked that we develop a report for the ownership and management authority related to the lands around the veterans home. We provided that to the committee, and it describes a process or a chain of events that occurred that makes this property different than what the director just discussed. So in 1990, through the reorganization of government, Statute 9-2-205 was developed. It transferred that property from management or ownership to the Department of Health. And then in 2013, the legislature put in a qualification that classifies those lands as acquired institutional lands, meaning that they're owned by the Department of Health, but they're managed under the jurisdiction of the Board of Land Commissioners. And at that time, the legislature required the office to also develop a report discussing the best use of the property, not the highest and best use. And OSLI determined that best use to be grazing, temporary use permits, and then the investigation of mineral development. We were also required to work with the Department of Health to determine the best use as well from their perspective. And again, this is all authority on lands that are outside, on lands that are not directly utilized for departmental purposes. So we're talking about lands outside of the campus of the vet's home and the skilled nursing facility, but all of the open space around there. And in consultation with the Department of Health, that best use was determined to investigate commercial, residential, and special use leasing, in addition to mineral development possibilities. And that's what the office has done as we've managed that property since 2013. There is an active agriculture and grazing lease on that property. It was identified in that report, and I don't remember the exact term for how long it will remain or how long it has been there. But that's how we've managed it for the best use and used it for grazing, used it for a sand and gravel lease, as the committee's been made aware of. One thing that I would like to note about this property is that in its original state, it was 1,272.82 acres. And since then, the state and the Board of Land Commissioners have sold off 345.48 acres. And a lot of that has gone to residential development closer to the town of Buffalo. It's also sold some land to the town of Buffalo. And as the bill is written now, no more sales could occur. And as the committee is aware, and inside the report that we provided to you, there are some outside lots that are closer to the city of Buffalo. In fact, there's a couple within the city of Buffalo that may be prime for or ripe for disposal in the future. So I want the committee to be aware that if it wanted to, this bill may limit its ability to sell those parcels to the city of Buffalo or for any other purpose going forward. Mr. Chairman, real quickly, that was the report and any updates we had related to the acquired institutional lands.
Chairman, or I mean, committee,
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Anderson.
The legislature is shocked that the property that we were going to put this skilled nursing facility on is actually a gravel pit, or could be if the guy wanted to do it. There was not one lease, there was two. So it was leased right after we did the bill to put the skilled nursing facility there, and then it was released again. And that's when a good citizen of Buffalo let us know that that was happening. And I don't think the commissioners or anybody else knew that was happening, that that lease had occurred. There's probably nothing that you have to inform anybody local that you're leasing that property. I don't know. Is there anything?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson,
Please.
there is a process for us to go through when we're leasing out any type of use on acquired institutional lands. And it simply requires coordination and communication with the institution, with the Department of Health. The statute goes on to say that if there's anything holding jurisdiction over the use of the property, that we are to inform them and seek comment from them as well. But from a sand and gravel lease perspective, and from what I understand about Johnson County and its zoning regulations, there's not much there. So really our only form of communication is to the Department of Health in this situation.
Yeah.
Chairman, follow up.
Please.
So the Department of Health would have known about the first lease and the second one?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, the Department of Health should have known about them. As we've discussed in previous committee meetings, we didn't follow this process as we could have or as thoroughly as we should have. We have not communicated specifically about this sand and gravel lease to them, and that's a failure on our office's part.
Thank you. Thank you.
Committee, any further questions?
Mr. Chairman, I would just also add that report was also provided back to the legislature when we finished it. It's not something that's recorded anywhere, but we're required to provide it back to the legislature. So having a developer or this committee or anybody else looking to develop that property, the information is out there. It's a little difficult to find, but it is there.
I had one question to a comment you said that if it might, the statute might, not allow the sale of the land to the city of Buffalo or to whomever easily. But if the land gets sold, then they're not bound by any of this anymore, are they? I mean, it's only because we own this land, the state land, that we're bound by the statute. So if it decides to be sold and is no longer state property, none of this. Am I correct?
Mr. Chairman, I think I understand your question. I think you are correct. However, the bill as written prohibits disposal of the property. So that's just the point I wanted to highlight for the committee.
Okay.
But Mr. Chairman,
Senator Anderson.
we could come back and release those two lots later though, couldn't we? If you really had a buyer that would enhance the property.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, I think that is a possibility. I don't read the bill to diminish the board's role in management of those properties. However, if an applicant came to us or somebody just interested in acquiring it, we would highlight this portion of statute and indicate to them that currently it's not allowable and use of our time on an application like that may be limited.
Okay, thank you. Further questions, committee? I do see Representative McGuire back there. I'd like to invite him if he'd like to come up and speak, please. Thank you, Director. Thank you, Mr. Crowder. Appreciate your testimony. We do have copies of that. We have those.
Very good.
We have those.
Representative McGuire, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. There's a lot to unpack there, so bear with me as we start from the beginning. So if you don't mind, let's start with the land around the Veterans Home. So that was originally Fort McKinney in 1877. And then when the fort was no longer needed in 1899, it was granted to the state of Wyoming. And in the original grant language, it said, for the benefit of Wyoming veterans. Didn't say anything about sand and gravel leases, didn't say anything about for the Common School Trust Fund. It said for the veterans of Wyoming and for their benefit. So with regard to, there's two different pieces of property, I would say yes. And the state trust lands around the Veterans Museum, or excuse me, around the Veterans Home are there specifically for the veterans. And all of you were here, if you recall, when the study was put out to place where the skilled nursing facility was going to be, we hired a very expensive architecture firm to look into everything. I mean, they uncovered every stone, and never once did I hear in that report, oh, and you know, there might be a sand and gravel pit, but don't worry about that. You know, it was, I don't know what rock you would be under in Cheyenne to not know how important that was a decision and for it not to come up. I mean, that is a pretty serious deal. And for the county commissioners to not know what's going on and the people who are running that facility not to know what's going on and then to have it renewed, there are serious questions there. But that's the land around the Veterans Home. And to sell any more of that piece of property or to mine it or anything else, I don't use this word lightly, but that would be sacrilegious. And it would absolutely be contrary to the trust that our veterans have placed in us. And if you look at the language in the bill, it says so long as that facility exists. If that facility goes away, then it would go back to the original grant language from the federal government to the state of Wyoming. That is what would control what would happen to that piece of property. Not just because somebody wants to sell it or we could put a golf course there or whatever, we'd have to go back to the original grant language and proceed from there. So that would be the land around the Veterans Facility. With regard to the land around the Veterans Cemetery, I think it's important. So if you go to our Constitution, which a lot of people like to quote our Constitution, I don't quote it very much, but when I do, I think it's pretty serious. Our Constitution was adopted by the people of the state of Wyoming in 1889. And in that language, in Article 18, Section 4, it says legislature to provide for disposition of lands. And it says the legislature shall enact the necessary laws for the sale, disposal, leasing, or care of all lands that have been or may hereby be granted to the state. And it goes on to say, and the legislature shall pass laws for the suitable keeping of those grant lands. And that was give or take about 3.6 million acres that came to the state of Wyoming. And yes, they are managed for the benefit of the schools, but that wasn't until 1929 when the Board of Land Commissioners was created by the legislature. And if you look at the article, it's 36-2-101, composition and powers in general, creating the Board of Land Commissioners. And it goes on to say, shall as such board have the direction, control, leasing, care, and disposal of all lands hereto
and hereafter granted or acquired by the state for the benefit and support of public schools, or for any other purpose whatsoever, subject to the limitations contained in the Constitution, which we just talked about, and the laws enacted by the legislature. And this legislative body has, in the past, in fact, it was Statute 19-14-108, where this legislature set aside the land that the Veteran Cemetery sits on right now. And there was nothing in there that ever said anything about grazing or anything else. It set that land aside, period, end of story, never to be used again. And if you go on and look, you can find some other examples. They talked about the Richard Bridge Historical Park. Well, yeah, 365107, that's the statute. Goes on to talk about, and this is in the exact same, this is in the same school section that the Veteran Cemetery is in. It's on the other side of the river. It goes on to say, in the center line of the North Platte River in section 36, township 34, which is what we're talking about, restricting the use of the leased property to historical landmark, park, recreation, museum, and municipal purposes, period. Nothing in there about grazing or mining gravel or anything else or selling it. It is set aside by this body, by the legislature, and that is a power that we have to do. So I would submit to you that historically, the legislature, when it created the State Land Board, it specifically set aside its own authority to manage lands if it should so choose to, and has done that in the past. And it's entirely appropriate in both of these situations to set them aside for the benefit of our veterans. They're being used, the land specifically around the cemetery right now is being used for grazing. Finery. Continue to let it be used for grazing. And the language subject to approval of the Adjutant General is specifically because the deputy testified to our joint committee. The question was, well, what if somebody wants to graze buffalo there? And they continue to break through the fence and they're getting into the veteran cemetery and creating a problem and making a mess. And the answer was, well, that's not something that we can enforce or tell them that they can't, whatever. So the language was put in there specifically so that the Adjutant General has got the final say. And if somebody's got an animal, rodeo bulls or whatever, that are creating a hazard, he can call them up and say, hey, I'm sorry, this just isn't working. Sheep, cattle, horses, whatever, that's fine. And I think all of you have been to the Veteran Cemetery. That is hallowed ground. And, you know, a good friend of myself and a senator from Casper, Stan Lowe, he's the one who, he's responsible for that. And nobody was here. He served in this house in 1962. And he was a veterans advocate. And on his own dime, he went back to Washington, D.C., and he found the money to establish that cemetery, federal dollars, and brought him back. And then he found the piece of property, and he came down here and got it set aside. And then he went and found federal dollars to build the bridge across the Platte River to get to the cemetery, all on his own dime, on his own time. I mean, how many of us can say, yeah, I found enough money to build a bridge across the Platte River? That was a big lift. And he did it for our veterans. That memory should be preserved. The sanctity of what the veteran sacrifice is. There are over 3,000 heroes buried there. And, you know, to set aside a few acres to be used, continue to be used for grazing for the sake of those heroes, I think is a price that just is so minor that I mean, I don't even know where to go with that. So thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you, Representative McGuire, for your testimony. Questions, committee? Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a letter here from Heather Jarvis, restrictions on school lands, and it's got an amendment on it. Is that an amendment you wanted us to do in the standing committee amendment?
I haven't seen it.
I don't know if you guys have that.
No, I haven't seen it.
I'm assuming you've seen that.
I have seen it, Mr. Chairman.
There's too many sections in there to get involved.
Yeah, I don't know what
Let's,
all those sections are.
I suggest we hold that. It's for either the floor or a standing.
Second reading or third reading or something.
And Mr. Chairman,
maybe
I'd
the
be
whole
happy to
amendment.
address it if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
So LSO Attorney Jarvis, who is very good, she went through all the different sections where it talks about once state lands is leasing a piece of property, and there may be other parties or two different parties, and there's language that says that it's their duty to try and maximize profit or maximize benefit for the state. So if you read that amendment as subject to, I think that it just adds confusion. I think that the bill is just fine the way it is. It's nice and clear. These two pieces of property, you can use them for grazing so long as those facilities are in existence. Subject to the final approval of the Adjutant General. If either of those facilities go away, then it goes back to the original language. With regard to the veterans' home up in Buffalo, it'd be the original grant language from the federal government. We'd have to read that, see what we can do with it. And with regard to the land around the veteran cemetery, it would go back to a standard piece of state land. But I think we can all agree, at least with the cemetery, I mean, gosh, I just can't even imagine. It's where my dad's buried. I don't think it's going to go away. The same thing with Veterans Home. I started going up there with my dad when I was probably 7 or 8. So I've seen it grow and am very familiar with that. So.
Committee, any further questions? No. Thank you. Thank you. Any further public testimony? Mr. Novick, please come forward. See you,
Mr.
Bill.
Chairman, members of the committee, good evening. Bill Novotny, Johnson County Commissioner. Here in strong support of this bill, we are proud to be home of the Wyoming Veterans Home and the soon-to-be-completed skilled nursing facility. We can provide any of the background on how this lease was discovered in reference to a question by Senator Anderson. We do not have zoning in Johnson County, so but the adjacent landowners should have been notified, and in checking with the city of Buffalo, they're not aware of ever being notified on the release of that gravel lease. What I would also share with this committee is that I've actually taken this piece of legislation to the family that currently holds the grazing lease for the veterans facility. They are in strong support of enshrining this into law, that they will continue to be able to graze there. They were not even aware that the property that they were leasing had been let to a mineral lease. And I just really believe that passing this bill helps ensure the pastoral nature of that campus. We've worked very hard to incorporate that entire campus into our trail system, which makes it more accessible for the residents to utilize, and also incorporates people in our community who walk by and get to interact with the residents of the veterans. So I really think this is a solid step in protecting the pastoral nature of that campus, and would stand for any questions that you have.
Committee, questions?
Mr. Chairman, you say you talked to the grazing lease. Did you have a discussion with the minerals lease, with the sand and gravel operation? And then I'm also curious on your trail system. I think that trail goes right up the mountain, right in front of the, how is it connected in?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, the conversation that we've had with the holder of the gravel lease was when we were contacted in the process of installing the water line that we donated to the veterans facility, asking us why we were removing excess materials. And we were required to remove those excess materials because it was specified by the construction department that oversaw that project when we put it together and put it for bid. So we were just following our responsibility in getting that extra capacity to the Veterans Home. That's when we first learned. And I will give credit to the Director of State Lands. When we called her on Friday afternoon of Frontier Days, she was actually in her office and took a call from a pretty mad commissioner, the former director of the Veterans Home, Mr. Jack Tarter, and Representative Craigo. So I do give her credit for taking our call that afternoon, but that was really when we first started to learn of the issue with the gravel lease. In reference to the trails, there's actually a spur that runs, that will be out the back window of where cottage number 2 is. And there is a second spur that takes veterans over to the highway, which connects to another spur of the trail system where you can go up. And if you're at all familiar going by, that is the spur that the previous resident used to like to go out and sit on the side of the road and wave at people, and he had his wheelchair adorned with flags. That's how he got out there, and we really want to make it accessible for our veterans up there.
Thank you. Further questions? Thank you. Any other further public testimony? Anyone online on this one? Okay, thank you. I'll close public testimony. Committee?
Move the bill.
Been moved by Senator Anderson.
Second.
Seconded by Senator Furphy. Committee, do we need to work the bill at all?
I guess not.
Are you good with what we have shown?
Yes.
What's your pleasure?
Call a question.
There we go. Question's been called for. Could we have a roll call, please?
House Bill 17, Senator Anderson,
Aye.
Senator Furphy, Senator McEwen,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Pappas,
Aye.
Chairman Landon.
Excused. Thank you. Committee, who would like to tackle this one?
I'll do it, Furphy?
Senator McEwen.
Oh, McEwen?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I don't believe we have any other business before us, so I'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.